Welcome, and in this lesson, we're going to talk about user password policy and managing it for specific users. So first, what I want to do is I want to take you into the Etsy directory, and I want to show you, we could take a look at vim login.defs. So that's going to mean defaults. So this login defaults allows us to automatically set specific parameters for our login and password aging information. For example, pass max days, min days. Well, what is max days? Max days, the maximum number of days before a password must be changed, where the min days is the minimum number of days before a password can be changed. So this is where we can specify that information. So minimum password length, the number of days to warn a user before their password is set to expire. So that's where we configure the defaults. But how do we change it for specific users? So in certain situations, if we're running a system where a user needs to be able to log in or have a user access to the system, we might need to do password policy enforcement. So we're going to have really three different tools that we're going to use. We're going to use PASSWD. We're also going to use usermod, and we're going to use the change command. The change command really can do anything that we need it to do in terms of managing password policy. It's used to modify the number of days between password changes, the date of the last password change, and it's used to enforce password policy. Now, when we're modifying all of these password-related policies, we're always modifying the Etsy PASSWD and the Etsy shadow file. Now the shadow file is going to contain information like last password change. When is it going to expire? Minimum number of days, maximum number of days before a password can be changed. So let's take a look at those permissions. I'm going to do an ls-al. I'm going to grep for shadow. And it's going to return our shadow file information. Now this is for our regular user account. You'll notice there's no privileges. The reason there's no privileges, and there should always be no privileges, is because you don't want a regular user in the system to take a look at the shadow file because it contains password hashes. It contains password information. We only want the root user to be able to log in and view this information. So that's why there's no permissions on there. Now, the other thing that we can also take a look at is, let's say that we have a user on the system that needs to have access to the system for like a mail account, but doesn't need an interactive shell. Now, an interactive shell is a shell that you log into the system with. We are currently logged into the system inside of an interactive shell. I'm on my linuxacademy.com lab server. So let's demonstrate this. I'm going to go ahead and do a user add, and I'm going to call this user1. Let's go ahead and set the password for user1. I'm just going to set it as an arbitrary password. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a usermod-s because I'm going to change their shell, bash shell, to sbin no login. And that means the user won't be able to log in. We need to specify the user we're doing it for. And that means the user's not going to be able to log into the shell, but they can still have an active password and username if they need to connect, for example, to the mail account, mail server through a mail program. So that's one way of managing users. The other things that we need to consider are, again, the password policies. So let's head back into our Etsy directory and do a cat on the shadow file. What I want to do is I want to talk about what all of this means, okay? So what we have is we have the username. The username needs to map back to a user inside of our Etsy password file, which contains user information. Our shadow file contains password policy information. Our next field is our password salt hash. It's a salt hash, which means it's encrypted. And what happens is when you log into your system with your text password, the system will check it and it'll encrypt it and make sure it matches what's inside of our shadow entry. The next column is going to be the last password date, which is the date of our last password change. Now, this is the number of days since Unix epoch. You'll notice when we're managing passwords, we can either specify dates, for example, expire date, or we could put the number of days since Unix epoch, which is 1907, January 1st, so 01/01/1970. Then our next field is going to be the minimum password age. So the minimum number of days before a password may be changed. If it's 0, it means there's no minimum. The max column, which is our next column, and there's not anything there, is the maximum number of days before a password must be changed. This means we're not enforcing when the password must be changed. Our column after that is the number of days warning when the password is about to expire. This will only work if we have the prior field, which is the maximum days before a password must be changed. Our column after that is our inactive column, which is the number of days an account remains active after a password has expired, which means it allows you to log in and change the password still. But if the number of days that's in this column for the inactive is passed, then your account is automatically locked. Then we have our last column here between our two colons, which is the expiration date. The number of days since Unix epoch, or we can put it in terms of year, month, date, the time that the account is to expire. This is great for contractors if you need to create temporary access for users and know that it will automatically lock at this given time period. Again, it's number of days since Unix epoch or an actual date in the future. So how do we manage this? Well, we do know with the user mod command, if we do user mod -- help or just H, there's a few things in here we can manage. For example, we can manage the expire date. We can also manage locking and unlocking users. With password, if we take a look at the password command, we can also use password to lock files. Not only to just change passwords, we can use it to lock files. We can use it to unlock files. But generally, we stick with the password command when it comes to changing user passwords. So let's go ahead and dive in and look at how we can manage password aging information, password policy information. So first, we need to be aware of how to view it. Now we're going to use the change command -L for a specific user. So we'll type in the user, which is default on our linuxacademy.com lab servers. And we can also use the change -L command for our user1 that we created. And so in fact, let's just stick with user1 as we go forward. We see the last password change, April 26, 2015. Password expires. Password is inactive. Account expires. Minimum number of days between password change. Maximum number of days between password change. And number of days of warning before password expires. So let's say that we have a new contractor, or this user1 is a contractor, and we need to expire his password 30 days from today. How might we do that? Well, what we'll want to do is we want to get that specific day. Now, I'm going to stick with naming everything in YYY or year, month, date format for simplicity, right? I don't always want to calculate the number of days since Unix epoch. So in order to do this, again, we want to set the account to expire, which means we want to make our account inactive. So how do we make our account inactive? So let's take a look at this. First, I'm going to open up another tab so we can go ahead and try to connect to that user. I'm going to copy my linuxacademy.com lab server IP address so I can connect to it. Make sure I can zoom in so you guys can see my screen. Now, let's go ahead and set this for the user. I'm going to go ahead and do change uppercase E. This is going to set the expiration date of our account, right? So what is the date we want to use? Let's just say it's 40 days from today. What is a simple way of getting 40 days from today? Well, we could do date -D, specify the date option, and then we'll say 40 days, and then let's put it in YY or year, month, date format. So we'll do +%F, and that's 2015-06-05, June 5th, 2015. So we'll do change -E, and we're going to set it to 2015. And we're going to just copy this here and paste it in there. So we'll copy, paste, and then for the user one. So that's going to set, and we'll take a look at change -L on our user one, and we're going to see that the account expires on June 5th, 2015. Now again, let's talk about the difference between account expiring and password expiring. Our password, this field here, is set the number of days, the maximum number of days until the password has to be changed. So for example, if we say that the password has to expire 90 days from today, how would we do that? So we would do change dash capital N, the maximum number of days, and we're just going to say we want to allow the maximum number of days of 90 for user 1. So we do a change dash L for user 1. Don't forget to pass in our username. And we see that our password expires 90 days from now. Now, our account expires before that, but our password expires 90 days from now. Let's go ahead and change our account expiration. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. In order to remove the account expiration, I'm just going to pass in -1 or -1 to the expiration option there for user 1. And then I'll just do a change dash L. And again, type in the username, change dash L username. And we see that the account never expires, but our password expires on July 25th. So our number of days of warning before password expires, so 7 days before July 25th, every time we log in, we're going to get our warning that our password is about to expire. So let's demonstrate how this works. Let's go ahead and set change dash capital M to 5 days for user 1. So if we do change dash L user 1, we see that it expires on April 26th. So now, if I attempt to log in to the user, and I'm going to set this user with a password so I can log into that user. If we attempt to log into the system, the same system, keep in mind, because remember I'm connecting again to my linuxacademy.com lab server. I'll enter in my IP address. And you'll notice it says that your password will expire in 5 days. Well, it also says this account is currently not available. Well, that indicates to me that we still have our sbin/no login applied to this individual account. So let's take a look at our cat etc passwd file. And let's grep for user 1. Well, that's correct. It does have the sbin no login there. So let's just change that. We're going to change usermod-s to bin bash for user 1. So now let's try to log into our system again. We've demonstrated how we can prevent shell login. And so here we've logged in and it says warning, your password will expire in 5 days. Now, again, if we take a look at change-l on our user 1, we see that we also have password inactive. Now, what does this mean? This is the number of days after a password expires that your account becomes inactive. So if our password expires on May 1st, 2015, I can log in. It's just going to force me to change my password. Let's demonstrate that. So how can we set it so that our password expires now? Remember, our change-e changes our account expires. Our uppercase M says the number of days, the maximum number of days until the password change. But how can I set the number of days since January 1st, 1970, Unix epoch, when the password was changed? Well, we could do change-d, pass in 0, and then the user. So we'll say user 1. So let's take a look at what that did. Well, what it did is it basically expired everything we had. It says our passwords must be changed. So if we come over to our user 1 login and attempt to log into the system again, it's going to force a password change. I can still log in. I just have to enter in my current password, then a new passwords, and then it allows me to log in the next time. So we're all logged in. That's what we can do to force a user to change a password on their next login. And that's also kind of what our password expires does. When we hit this date, it says you're going to need to change your password. Now, password inactive, that's the number of days after a password expires until the account is just locked, which means you can't even log in and change your password again. So if a user doesn't log in for 5 days after the password changes, it'll automatically lock the account and they'll have to contact an administrator in order to be able to access that account. So how would we do that? Well, let's clean up our screen a little bit here. And we're just going to use the change-uppercase I and then the number of days of inactivity after a password has expired. So we'll set that to 5 for user 1. So if we do change-l and again pass it our user 1, I always get a little excited there. It's going to say the account becomes inactive on May 6th. So an administrator will have to unlock it. Now, all this is going to do is put an exclamation point in front of the hash, which basically locks the account. So let's go ahead and modify these dates. Let's do a change. And again, in order to force a user to change their login credentials after they log in, it's change-d0 and then the user. So we'll take a look, change-l for user 1, and everything must be changed. How do we change the number of days of warning? So that's simple. We'll just do change-uppercase W, and maybe we'll change it to 3 for user 1. So now if we do a change-l on the user 1, we see that number of days of warning before password expires. Now again, we're using the change command to modify it for single user. If you want to modify the defaults for all users, and again, this is on user creation, we can modify the etc login.defs file. So that concludes it for this lesson. Go ahead and complete this lesson.